I work as a wildlife removal expert in Atlanta, Georgia, a job that, while usually mundane, occasionally leads me into some strange situations. Over the years, I've dealt with raccoons turning attics into party dens, snakes slithering out of people's plumbing, and once even an alligator hiding in someone's tool shed. Nothing about this line of work surprises me anymore, or so I thought. You see, as much as I've been dragged into some truly bizarre encounters, I've never been truly terrified. Not until I got an email 2 weeks ago that would take me to the North Georgia mountains, and into an experience I still have trouble believing. The email came in at 9 o'clock on a Monday morning. I was sipping my coffee at my desk, mindlessly scrolling through the inbox when I came across it. The subject line read, "Calling all wildlife warriors." Now, I get some quirky emails from time to time, but this one immediately stood out because it wasn't asking for help with a raccoon infestation or a stray possum in someone's backyard. Instead, the sender claimed to have a lead on a creature most people consider pure fantasy, a Sasquatch. I'll admit I laughed when I first opened it. The writer, who introduced himself as Russell Hastings, was clearly out of his mind, or so I thought. The email was a rambling masterpiece of insanity, written with the kind of confidence that only comes from someone who either knows they're absolutely right or is too delusional to care. Russell began by complimenting my company on its glowing online reviews, calling us fearless animal removal experts. Then he launched into his pitch, explaining that he and his cousin Eli had spotted a Sasquatch not once, but twice, deep in the forests of North Georgia. Eli apparently was convinced he'd pinpointed the creature's hideout, a cave tucked away in a remote area of the mountains. Russell's request was simple yet absurd. He wanted me to join their expedition to capture the beast alive. Yes, alive. He assured me they had no intention of killing the creature, unless, as he put it, the Sasquatch had murder in its heart. He admitted that neither he nor Eli had the skills to handle a creature of this magnitude. Russell didn't even own a pet, and Eli's experience extended only to trapping squirrels. That apparently was why they needed me. The email concluded with a promise of a handsome day rate, $650 per day for 3 or 4 days of work. The kicker, though, was Russell's appeal to my ego. He wrote, "I know this is a lot to ask of a common man, but maybe you aren't so common after all. Maybe you're destined for greatness. Think about it. Your name etched in history alongside the greats Buzz Aldrin, Julius Caesar, Eli Hastings, Russell Hastings. Insert your name here." The email ended with a Dolly Parton quote. "It's hard to be a diamond in a rhinestone world." I couldn't tell if Russell was a lunatic, a prankster, or both. But the email was too bizarre, and frankly too funny not to respond to. I wrote back, explaining that I'd need more details before committing to anything. A few days later, Russell replied with a shopping list of supplies they'd need for the hunt. Bear traps, predator urine to mask our scent, a snare pole, rope, sleeping bags, and something he called a winning attitude. He also confirmed the pay $650 per day and said they'd cover all expenses. I thought about it for a while. $650 a day was nothing to sneeze at, and most of the equipment he requested was already in my possession. I could pick up the rest in an afternoon. I rationalized that even if this turned out to be a prank, it wasn't like I'd be out much time or effort. Besides, who wouldn't want to spend a few days in the mountains? So I emailed Russell back and agreed to the job. 2 days later, I found myself driving up a winding dirt road toward Eli's cabin, deep in the woods near the Georgia-North Carolina border. The further I drove, the more isolated I felt. The cell phone signal dropped off about 20 miles back, and the forest grew thicker with every mile. By the time I pulled into the clearing where the cabin stood, I was already wondering if I'd made a mistake. Eli's cabin was little more than a wooden shack, the kind of place you'd expect to see in a horror movie. It leaned slightly to one side, and the tin roof was dotted with rust. A battered pickup truck sat in the yard, its tires caked in dried mud. As I stepped out of my truck, I was greeted by the sight of 2 men walking out of the cabin to meet me. The first was Russell. He was a short, pudgy man with slicked back hair that looked like it hadn't been washed in days. He was grinning ear to ear, his energy manic as he approached me with outstretched arms. "Welcome, my friend," he exclaimed, his voice dripping with enthusiasm. "You have no idea the history we're about to make." The second man was Eli, who couldn't have been more different from his cousin. He was older, taller, and weathered by years of hard living. His skin was leathery and sun-damaged, and his hair was going grey at the temples. He barely spoke, instead giving me a curt nod as he adjusted the shotgun slung over his shoulder. As Russell rattled off a mile-a-minute monologue about the greatness we were about to achieve, I couldn't help but notice Eli's quiet demeanor. His eyes darted to the tree line every few seconds, as if he was expecting something or someone to come bursting out of the woods at any moment. When he did speak, it was in short, cryptic phrases. At one point, Russell turned to him and asked, "Eli, you got the traps ready?" Eli replied, "Yeah," then added under his breath, "but they ain't going to stop it." That was the first moment I felt a twinge of unease. Up until then, I'd assumed this whole thing was a joke or a wild goose chase. But there was something about Eli's quiet fear that unnerved me. This wasn't a man who seemed prone to flights of fancy. If he believed there was something out there, maybe I should too. The first night was spent, as Russell called it, strategizing. This consisted mostly of Russell pacing back and forth in the cabin, gesturing wildly as he laid out his plan. According to him, Eli had identified a cave deep in the forest where the Sasquatch was likely hiding. The plan was simple. Eli would act as bait to draw the creature out, and I would handle the traps. Russell naturally would take on the role of negotiator in case the beast, by some miracle, could speak English. As ridiculous as the plan was, I couldn't help but admire Russell's confidence. He truly believed we were on the brink of making history. Eli, on the other hand, sat in a corner sipping moonshine and muttering under his breath. I noticed his hands trembled slightly as he brought the glass to his lips. That night, we all slept in the one-room cabin. Russell took the bed, I unrolled a sleeping bag on the floor, and Eli sat by the window with his shotgun, keeping watch. I don't think he slept at all. The next morning we set out into the woods, each of us carrying our assigned gear. I had an assortment of traps and sprays, Russell carried camping supplies, and Eli brought provisions and his ever-present shotgun. The hike was grueling, the trail almost non-existent as we pushed through dense underbrush and climbed steep inclines. Periodically, Russell would stop and let out what he called his Bigfoot call, a bizarre guttural yell that sounded like a cross between a dying moose and a man having an asthma attack. Each time he would pause and listen intently, as if expecting an answer. There was never one, but that didn't dampen his enthusiasm. It was about 2 hours before nightfall when we heard the first sign that we weren't alone. We were setting up camp for the night when the noise came from deeper in the forest, a low, guttural growl that sent shivers down my spine. It wasn't the kind of sound you'd associate with any known animal. It was deeper, more resonant, and almost deliberate, as if whatever was making it wanted us to know it was there. Russell froze mid-sentence, his eyes widening. Eli immediately leveled his shotgun at the tree line, his expression grim. I grabbed my snare pole, my heart hammering in my chest. For a moment, everything was silent except for the rustling of leaves in the breeze. Then, the growl came again, louder this time, and it was followed by the sound of heavy footsteps. Whatever was out there, it was big. Before any of us could react, something burst out of the bushes. For a split second, I thought it was a gorilla. It was tall, covered in thick matted fur, and its movements were almost humanoid. But as it came closer, I realized it wasn't a Sasquatch at all. It was a man in a gorilla suit. "Don't shoot!" the man yelled, raising his hands in the air. I stared in disbelief as the man ripped off the gorilla mask, revealing a familiar face. It was Kenny Morton, one of my biggest competitors in the wildlife removal business. "Kenny, what the hell are you doing here?" I asked, lowering my snare pole. Before Kenny could answer, another voice called out from above. "I told you not to take off the mask, dumbass." Looking up, I saw another man sitting in a tree stand about 30 feet above us. He looked down at Kenny, then at the rest of us, and let out a long sigh. Well, I guess the cat's out of the bag now. As it turned out, the man in the tree stand was Milton, a local barfly who had overheard Eli talking about the Sasquatch hunt. Deciding he wanted a piece of the action, Milton had hired Kenny to join him in capturing the creature. The two of them had been tracking us for hours, hoping to swoop in and claim the glory for themselves. The revelation sparked an argument among the group. Eli was furious, accusing Milton of betraying him by blabbing about the hunt. Milton shrugged and spat a glob of chewing tobacco onto the ground. What can I say? Rich and famous sounded better than drunk and broke. Russell, meanwhile, was indignant. This is our expedition, he shouted. You're just a bunch of poachers. I stood off to the side, trying to process what had just happened. The whole situation was absurd, and I was beginning to regret ever agreeing to this job. But before I could voice my concerns, a new sound cut through the argument, a series of whoops and howls that sent chills down my spine. It was the Sasquatch. The argument stopped instantly. We all turned toward the sound, our expressions ranging from fear to awe. The noise was unlike anything I'd ever heard before, a mix of animalistic growls and almost human-sounding cries. It was close. Eli raised his shotgun, his eyes scanning the forest. Kenny grabbed the snare pole I'd dropped, while Milton climbed down from his tree stand, muttering curses under his breath. Russell, of course, looked ecstatic. This is it, he whispered. We're about to make history. The noise grew louder, and the forest around us seemed to close in. I could feel the hairs on the back of my neck stand up as the stench of decay filled the air. Whatever was out there, it was getting closer. I tightened my grip on the snare pole, bracing myself for whatever was about to emerge from the shadows. The forest fell deathly silent as we all stood there, weapons in hand, waiting for something to emerge from the shadows. The smell of rot and musk was overwhelming, so thick it felt like it clung to my skin. I could feel my pulse hammering in my throat. Every instinct I had was screaming at me to turn and run, to leave these lunatics behind and get as far away as possible. But my legs wouldn't move. I was frozen, staring into the darkness, waiting. Then we heard it. The sound of branches snapping, heavy footsteps pounding the earth, and a low growl that seemed to reverberate through my bones. Whatever was out there wasn't just big, it was massive. It moved with a purpose, each step deliberate, each sound calculated. It was stalking us. Russell, of course, couldn't contain his excitement. This is it, he whispered, grinning like a maniac. This is our moment. Stay calm, everyone. Remember the plan. I wanted to grab him by the shoulders and shake him. Stay calm? What plan? Did he honestly think we were prepared for whatever was coming? Suddenly, a shape emerged from the shadows, and for a moment I thought I was hallucinating. It was enormous, at least 9 or 10 feet tall, its body covered in thick, matted hair that was somewhere between reddish-brown and black. Its arms were long and muscular, its chest barrel-like, and its legs thick as tree trunks. But it was its face that sent a chill down my spine. Its deep-set yellow eyes gleamed with intelligence and malice, and its mouth was twisted into what I can only describe as a grimace. This wasn't some dumb animal. It was something else entirely. The Sasquatch stopped a few feet from where we were standing, its gaze sweeping over each of us. For a moment no one moved. No one even breathed. Then, to my absolute horror, Russell stepped forward. "Oh, great one of the forest," he called, his voice dripping with reverence. "We come in peace." I couldn't believe what I was seeing. Russell, the same man who'd spent the entire trip spewing motivational quotes and half-baked plans, was now standing inches away from a creature that could snap him in half without breaking a sweat. And what did he do? He pulled a cigarette out of his pocket and offered it to the Sasquatch like he was making small talk with a neighbor. Without waiting to see what it would do next, we bolted. Eli fired another shot over his shoulder as we tore through the forest, our feet pounding against the ground as branches whipped at our faces and arms. I could hear the Sasquatch behind us, its heavy footfalls growing louder with each passing second. My lungs burned. My legs felt like they were on fire, but I didn't stop. I couldn't. The thought of that thing catching up to me was enough to override every ounce of pain and exhaustion. Eli was ahead of me, moving with the kind of speed and agility I didn't think a man his age was capable of. Milton and Kenny were somewhere behind us, their panicked shouts mixing with the sound of the Sasquatch's guttural growls. Then the footfall stopped. I skidded to a halt, nearly tripping over a fallen branch as I turned to look behind me. Milton and Kenny were gone. The forest was eerily quiet, save for the sound of the wind rustling through the trees. My heart was pounding in my chest as I scanned the area, my eyes darting from shadow to shadow, and that's when I realized why the footfalls had stopped. The Sasquatch wasn't on the ground anymore. It was in the trees. I looked up just in time to see its massive form leaping from branch to branch, its movements disturbingly silent for something so large. It moved with an almost predatory grace, its yellow eyes fixed on us as it closed the distance. "Eli, it's in the trees!" I shouted, my voice cracking with panic. Eli didn't stop running, but he glanced up, his face pale with fear. "Keep moving!" he yelled. "Don't stop." I wanted to listen. I really did. But my legs were trembling and my breath was coming in short, ragged gasps. I knew I couldn't keep this up much longer. The Sasquatch leapt down from the trees, landing with a thud a few feet behind us. Its long arms reached out, grabbing for anything it could. I felt its hand brush against my backpack, and I instinctively slipped out of the straps, letting it fall to the ground. Eli wasn't as lucky. The Sasquatch grabbed him by the backpack and hoisted him into the air. He let out a startled yelp, kicking and thrashing as the creature held him aloft. For a moment, I thought he was done for, but then he did something I didn't expect. He slipped out of the backpack just like I had and fell to the ground with a grunt. We didn't stop to look back. The cabin was only 100 yards away, and it felt like our only chance at survival. I pushed myself harder, my vision narrowing as I focused on the small wooden structure in the distance. When we finally reached the cabin, Eli burst through the door, slamming it shut behind us and shoving a heavy wooden bar across it to keep it closed. I collapsed onto the floor, my chest heaving as I tried to catch my breath. My entire body was shaking, and my ankle throbbed with a pain that I knew wasn't good. Eli didn't waste any time. He grabbed a shotgun from above the fireplace along with a box of shells and handed it to me. "You know how to use this?" he asked, his voice steady despite the chaos outside. I nodded, though I wasn't sure I could aim straight in my current state. "Good," he said. "We've got enough guns and ammo in here to take down a small army. If that thing gets in, we'll make sure it regrets it." The cabin, as I'd noticed earlier, was a prepper's paradise. There were shelves stocked with canned goods and bottled water, crates of ammunition, and even a couple of Molotov cocktails sitting on the counter. If there was ever a place to make a last stand, this was it. But as I sat there, clutching the shotgun and listening to the sounds of the Sasquatch prowling outside, I couldn't help but feel like it wouldn't be enough. The next few moments were a blur. I remember the creature slamming against the door, the sound of wood splintering as it tried to force its way in. Eli fired through the window, shouting obscenities and insults at the thing. I threw together a few makeshift Molotov cocktails, lighting one and tossing it out the window in the hopes of scaring it off. The fire seemed to work, at least temporarily. The creature let out an enraged roar and backed away from the cabin, its massive form retreating into the darkness. But I knew it wasn't over, not yet. The silence that followed the Sasquatch's retreat was almost more terrifying than its earlier rage. Eli and I sat in the cabin, backs against the wall, guns resting across our laps. The fire from the Molotov cocktail flickered outside, casting jagged shadows across the forest. My heart was still pounding, and my hands trembled so badly I almost dropped the shotgun. For a moment, I thought maybe the fire had scared it off for good, but Eli wasn't so confident. "Don't you relax yet," he muttered, peeking out through the shattered window. His voice was low and grim, barely above a whisper. "It's out there, just waiting, watching." I followed his gaze out into the dark forest, but I couldn't see anything beyond the faint glow of the firelight. Still, I could feel it, this oppressive presence, like the forest itself was alive and holding its breath. The hairs on the back of my neck stood on end, and every nerve in my body screamed at me to run, even though I had nowhere to go. Eli stood and paced the room, clearly agitated. His face was pale, and sweat beaded on his forehead. He loaded more shells into his shotgun with shaky hands, muttering to himself. "Damn thing's smart," he said. "Too smart. It's testing us, wearing us down. Won't be long before it tries again." I didn't doubt him. The Sasquatch wasn't like any animal I'd ever encountered. It was cunning, calculating, almost methodical in its approach. This wasn't some dumb beast acting on instinct, it was a predator, and we were its prey. Eli suddenly stopped pacing and turned to me, his eyes wide with realization. "The truck," he said. If we can get to the truck, we might have a chance. But we've got to move fast before it circles back. My stomach dropped at the suggestion. The truck was parked about 30 feet from the cabin, and while 30 feet might not sound like much, it felt like miles knowing that thing was out there. Still, Eli was right. We couldn't stay in the cabin forever. If the Sasquatch didn't get us, the fire I'd started with the Molotovs eventually would. The smoke was already beginning to seep into the cabin, and I could feel the heat creeping in through the walls. I nodded, swallowing hard. "Okay," I said, my voice barely steady. "Let's do it." Eli grabbed his rifle, slung a backpack over his shoulder, and handed me the keys to the truck. "You drive," he said. "I'll cover us." I didn't argue. My ankle was still throbbing from the fall earlier, but I could still manage the pedals. I limped to the door, clutching the shotgun tightly, and took a deep breath. My entire body was shaking, and my chest felt tight with fear, but there was no turning back now. Eli unbarred the door and threw it open. "Go!" he shouted, stepping out onto the porch and aiming his rifle into the darkness. I bolted for the truck, the pain in my ankle screaming with every step. The night air hit me like a slap to the face, thick with the smell of smoke and something far worse, the Sasquatch's musky, rotting stench. I could hear Eli firing behind me, shouting curses into the night. The gunshots echoed through the forest, but they didn't drown out the sound of heavy footsteps closing in. I reached the truck and flung the door open, scrambling inside and jamming the key into the ignition. The engine roared to life, and I slammed my hand against the horn, hoping to draw Eli's attention. "Come on!" I screamed, my voice cracking. Eli turned and sprinted toward the truck, his rifle still clutched in one hand. But before he could reach me, the Sasquatch exploded out of the darkness. It moved so fast I barely had time to react, its massive body slamming into Eli like a freight train. He went flying, crashing into the side of the cabin with a sickening thud. "No!" I shouted, my voice raw with panic. I watched in horror as the Sasquatch turned its attention to Eli, its enormous hands wrapping around his torso. He tried to fight back, swinging the rifle like a club, but it was no use. The creature lifted him off the ground like he weighed nothing and hurled him into the forest. For a moment I thought it was over. But then the Sasquatch turned toward the truck, its yellow eyes locking onto mine. I didn't think, I just acted. I slammed my foot on the gas and the truck lurched forward, its tires kicking up dirt and gravel. The Sasquatch roared and charged toward me, its massive form illuminated by the headlights. It reached the truck just as I sped past, slamming one massive fist into the side of the vehicle. The impact was so strong it nearly sent me skidding off the road, but I managed to hold on, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. As I drove, I glanced in the rearview mirror and saw the Sasquatch standing in the middle of the road, its body illuminated by the faint glow of the burning cabin. For a moment, I thought it might follow me, but it just stood there, watching as I disappeared into the night. I don't remember much of the drive back to civilization. Everything after the cabin felt like a blur, a haze of fear and adrenaline that left me numb. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely keep the truck on the road, and my chest ached from the effort of breathing. The pain in my ankle had become a dull throb, but it didn't matter. All that mattered was getting as far away from those woods as possible. When I finally reached the nearest town, a small, sleepy place called Raven's Hollow, I pulled into the parking lot of a 24-hour gas station and collapsed against the steering wheel. For the first time since this nightmare began, I let myself cry. The clerk at the gas station must have noticed the state I was in because he came outside to check on me. He was a young guy, probably no older than 20, with a concerned look on his face. "Hey man, you okay?" he asked, peering through the truck's window. I opened my mouth to answer, but no words came out. How could I even begin to explain what had happened? That I'd gone into the woods with a couple of lunatics to hunt Bigfoot and barely escaped with my life? That I'd seen things no sane person would believe? Instead, I just shook my head. "I need a phone," I managed to croak, my voice hoarse and trembling. The clerk nodded and led me inside, where he handed me the store's landline. My hands shook as I dialed the only number I could think of, my boss. When he picked up, I tried to explain what had happened, but the words came out jumbled and incoherent. "Slow down," he said, his voice calm but concerned. "Where are you? Are you hurt?" I'm in Raven's Hollow, I said, my voice cracking. I think I broke my ankle, but it's not just that. There's something in the woods, something big. It killed them. All of them. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Who killed who? He asked, his tone skeptical. The Sasquatch, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. It's real. I saw it. I fought it. Before I could finish, the clerk cut me off. Hey man, I think you should sit down, he said, his expression a mix of pity and concern. You're bleeding. I glanced down and saw that my jeans were soaked with blood. It wasn't mine. It was Eli's. Or maybe Russell's. I didn't know and I didn't care. All I wanted was to get as far away from those woods as possible. The rest of the night was a blur. I ended up at the local hospital, where they treated my ankle and pumped me full of painkillers. The cops came to ask me questions, but I could tell they didn't believe a word I said. They chalked it up to a drunken accident, especially after they found the empty moonshine bottles in the truck. By the time they released me the next morning, I felt hollow. The adrenaline had worn off, leaving me with nothing but exhaustion and a bone-deep ache that no amount of painkillers could touch. It's been weeks since that night, and I still can't shake the feeling that I'm being watched. Every time I close my eyes, I see the Sasquatch's yellow eyes staring back at me, and I hear the sound of Russell's screams echoing in my head. I don't know if anyone will believe this story, but I had to get it out. Maybe it'll serve as a warning to anyone else foolish enough to go looking for the unknown. Sometimes myths and legends are best left alone, and as for me, I don't answer emails at work anymore.